chair for the Upstate Native Plant Society. And it's quite an honor to be always to put great speakers in front of folks and educate the public. That's kind of what the mission of the Native Plant Society is, and preserve, protect, and restore native plants, and do that through an education-based agenda. And so, you know, invasive plants have been a bane in our ass for a long time. And so just, we're great to have this meeting is timely, and that we just had a wonderful article come out about invasive plants and the work that the city and the county of Greenville has been doing, fighting invasives along the Reedy River corridor. And having, you know, known all these problems that we've had forever. So last year I set a course in motion to link a lot of partners in fighting invasive plants in the upstate. So we're forming an invasive coalition here in the upstate. We've got a lot of partners on board so far. This Friday, we'll be having another organizational meeting to kind of kick that off. And in the fall, we will be having a forum and other events like weed wrangles and that kind of thing that are still in the works being planned. So we're going to make invasive plants a household word. You know, when the Native Plant Society was formed, you know, we wanted to make native plants a household word. And I think we've done that. You know, so now we have to work just as hard to make an invasive plants a household word. And because, again, those two things go hand in hand, as we unfortunately have to speak of. So tonight's meeting is very, very timely, and all the efforts that we're going to be making, not just in the coming year, but in the future years, so that we can really make a comprehensive attack on invasive species. I don't have any illusions that we're going to eliminate all the plants along the Swamp Rabbit Trail, but we're going to make a stab at it. We're going to raise the awareness and see where it goes from there. So so thank you all for joining us tonight for this hybrid Zoom meeting. We're still figuring out the technology and to make everything work. And so just thank you for your patience on that. So let me introduce our speakers tonight. Our speakers tonight are Allison Guggenheimer and Steve Compton. I've known Steve for a long time. He's been a stalwart working on invasive plants for a long time through the Clemson University. Steve has a biology degree from Presbyterian College, and early in his career through the nursery business, about 30 years at Happy Plants Nursery in Easley. And then he has recently worked with the Clemson Department of Plant Industry, and he's managed statewide programs on invasive animal and plant species. And he's been a real big friend for the Native Plant Society for for at least 30 years that we've been in existence. And thank you, Steve, for all you've been doing for us. And I also want to introduce Allison Guggenheimer. Allison received her BS in zoology from Ohio State and MS in wildlife fisheries from Texas A&M. Her research is primarily focused on how anthropogenic disturbance and land management affect wildlife populations. She has a passion in educating both formally and in classrooms at Ohio State, Texas A&M, and now at Clemson University. And so we're looking forward to these talks on invasive species and how we can all better serve our natural world through ridding ourselves of some of these invasive plants. So introduction of our speakers. Thank you.
All right. Looks like I'm unmuted. Keep my water here. Down here. All right. If anybody in the room can't hear me or on Zoom, please just let me know. I got Steve beside me. Oh, this is mirrored. Weird. So we might be swapping back and forth if you see our heads come in and out of here. I'm going to try to be conscious that y'all can't hear me if I step away from the computer, because I tend to be animated, but I'm going to try to contain myself. Thank you guys so much for inviting us to come here. Bill actually came to a talk that I gave at the Emeritus College at Clemson, and then he invited me to come speak to you guys. So I appreciate the invite. And of course, I had to bring my best buddy, Steve. We worked together in Steve's last few years at Clemson before he just recently retired, but he came out of retirement for you guys tonight. So he's here for backup because he is just such a wealth of knowledge, and I'm just a new guy. So I brought him to help answer the hard questions. My talk's gonna start really, really broad, just in general about conceptual stuff about invasive species, and then we'll get narrow. We'll start talking about what we do at Clemson to try to manage and mitigate some of these problems. All right, get this slide going. Okay. And I get ahead of myself, so I kind of already talked about this. So introduction of invasive species, role of Clemson's regulatory services, and a little overview of how we manage them in South Carolina. And then if we have time, I've got a couple of pests of concern that we can talk about. I might let you guys kind of lead where we go from there, just depending on how much time we have left and what kind of questions you have. So first I want to ask you, what do you think of when you hear the term invasive species? I'm thinking this group, I'm serious, I'm asking for, what do you guys think? I'll shout it out. What do you think when you hear invasive species? Give me some examples. Ivy. Ivy. I know fig buttercup. Don't mean to curse. Don't mean to curse. What else? Privet. Okay. Kudzu. Yes. Yes. Whoa. In sync. Bradford pear. Yeah. Honeysuckle. Honeysuckle. Okay. Yeah. So these are ones that we are exposed to and see a lot in South Carolina and throughout the country. Kind of depend on what you run into and what you focus on is what you end up seeing. But there's just so many. In general, it's, something that's not native to a region, right? It spreads rapidly, and it prevents native species from thriving, which is something y'all care very much about. Let's see if I can change. Sorry, it's a little bit delayed when I change slides. There we go. So we've talked about a couple of examples of invasive species, but what do you guys think is the most invasive species? If you had to pick just one organism in the whole world, that's no cheat. Bill, you can't answer this because you already answered it before. Humans, right? Yeah, we're the most invasive species. We brought all the invasive species. We're the ones that move them all around. We've been shipping them, flying them, bringing them on purpose, by accident. We're the ones moving them all around, and we also move around a lot and do a lot of damage. So we're actually the most invasive species. See, I'm getting ahead of myself. What did I say? We even train other animals to help us manage invasive species. So in this photo, this is a picture of a dog that has been trained to detect brown tree snakes in the landing gear of planes. So brown tree snakes are an invasive species in Guam, and they have decimated their native bird and lizard population. They're native to Indonesia and a couple of other areas, but there were no native predators to some of these birds and lizards, and so they've been wiping them out. So humans are trying to do due diligence by training other animals to keep them from getting up in the landing gear of planes and getting brought to other countries. It's just a cool example I like to show. So at what point is a species defined as invasive? This is a tough question. So there's a lot of different ways that we define invasive species. Do y'all know horses are invasive species? Yeah, so in some areas, wild horses in North America, they're not really a native species. They're a wild escaped domesticated species. But if you talk about the idea of euthanizing wild horses, people have a lot of emotions around that kind of thing. Feral cats, right? That brings up a lot of feelings in people. If you tell somebody to step on a bug or to pull plants out, not a lot of people are going to have too much of a problem with that. But we get into some emotional attachments with what I call the charismatic megafauna. So the big, cute stuff that we have feelings for. So also, what border, what counts? Was it one town over? If it's one state over, if it's from another country? At what point do we count it as an invasive species? These organisms don't have borders. We have borders that we impose on them, but they're just trying to survive. They're not really trying to do anything nefarious. And we don't like some species being in places, but we don't mind others. Like I was mentioning, horses, things like that. People have a lot of different feelings about those. Okay, but how do invasive species get around? We know it's a really big problem, but it's actually very difficult in the grand scheme of things, for a new invasive species to get somewhere, we as humans are doing so much to bring them different places, but there's a lot of roadblocks that prevent them from establishing. So they have to have some form of transportation. It's always some human form of transportation from the native range. And then once they arrive, the conditions have to be just right for them to even survive. It may not even be the right conditions to germinate. And even if one plant, we'll say, germinates, it may not grow larger or large enough to reproduce. Maybe there's only one individual and it's a sexually reproducing species. And even if it does, is it going to be able to spread across the landscape? Is it going to be able to travel and truly take over? Or is it just going to be one little pop-up, kind of die out naturally on its own? So theoretically, you pick up a seed, you're on vacation, you pick up a handful of seeds, you fly home and you drop them in your backyard. It's a really low chance that it's going to survive. Please don't do that. This is not a take-home experiment that I want anyone to do. I'm just saying, as an example, it's really low, like less than 10% that it's even gonna survive at that point. So although we do have so many invasive species, I just want to point out that there are a lot of roadblocks preventing them. Now that we've kind of got a little bit more of a better idea of what, different concepts of invasive species, there's a couple of terms I want to throw at you guys and see what you think about. So what about native invasive species, right? So something that's native to an area, but it's become invasive. So I like to use coyotes as an example. They're completely native, but some kind of condition has caused their populations to really accelerate. So a lot of times it's species that do really well with urban sprawl or tend to live very easily with humans, where other species do not and get pushed out. So their populations skyrocket. They can adapt to eating trash or to living in human-made structures, things like that. So it's kind of a weird idea. And then non-native, but also non-invasive. There's lots of plants and animals that are not native, but they also don't become invasive species. A lot of cultivated plants that are brought from other countries, they require a lot of care. I'm sure you guys all have gardens, and you know that if you don't tend to some of those non-native species, they are not going to survive. And they're certainly not going to take over your whole yard, right? Just because it's not native doesn't mean it's invasive. And then refugee organisms. So organisms that are moving native ranges, and it can be due to a lot of different factors. It could be due to a warming climate, flooding events, it could be due to sea rise, it could be urban sprawl pushing them out of some of their native habitats. So their native ranges are moving, they're getting pushed farther north. There's a lot of species that are now farther north than they've ever been found before, or farther inland, or having to find new places to live that they didn't live before. So they're technically not in their native range anymore. So it's just, there's no right or wrong answers here. This is just a couple of interesting things that come up when you start to dive deep into it, and it's very complicated and confusing. So if you're still pondering about how you feel about some of these things, I am too. I'm still thinking about my feelings on these different things.
Well, how do we figure that? Refugee?
Coyotes, you could count it as I wouldn't count it as a refugee organism. It could be considered that because it's doing so well in urban spaces. So it's able to adapt in ways that certain other species cannot. That's not the only example, but yeah, I would consider that one a native invasive in my mind. Okay, so we know it's a big problem, but why do we care? You guys care a lot because it's pushing and smothering and killing native species that you care a lot about. But there's also monetary reasons. It's very costly. This is not has not been adjusted for recent inflation changes, but at least 1.28 trillion has been spent in the last 50 years to try to contain and eradicate and mitigate invasive species. There's up to 1.5 new invasive species estimated to be introduced every day. And I'm not just talking about plants, any organism. And right now there's over 40,000 species that are threatened with extinction worldwide, which is 20% of the known and evaluated species. So you can look that up on IUCN. It changes all the time. And we know that invasive species are a major problem for endangered and threatened species. And there's a lot of invasive species that have spread so far and established that completely eradicating them is just not feasible. There's just not enough manpower. There's not a good solution that is, safe. And also, sometimes removing an invasive species can do more harm than good. Some of them have been here so long, and other native species are now dependent on those invasive species, and removing them would cause a major upset and unbalance. So it's a complicated problem. All right, now I'm going to kind of switch and tell you a little bit about what we do. So Clemson's Regulatory Services, you might be familiar with some of these programs. We have a Department of Pesticide Regulation, Fertilizer and Seed Certification, Plant Industry, and then Ag Service Lab. If anyone ever had a soil test, ever had their soil tested, that's Ag Service Lab. So they're one of our sister departments. The invasive species team falls under the Department of Plant Industry, which also houses organic certification. And then we also have nursery inspection, the apiary inspection, and then the Plant Pest and Diagnostics Clinic, which is pretty cool. If you guys ever have any sort of plant that's showing some kind of sickness or insect damage that you can't identify, you can send in a sample and they can help identify it for you. So in South Carolina, we're a little bit unique. Most states, what we do with invasive species would fall under the Department of Agriculture. And we do have a Department of Agriculture in South Carolina, and they do a lot, but they don't deal with these particular programs. The state has delegated the power to Clemson University. So through the Clemson State Crop Pest Commission, it's made up of 3 Board of Trustee members, and they are granted the authority to prevent the introduction, spread, or dissemination of plant pests, along with a lot of other stuff. And that's part of what they do. And it's a really awesome, unique opportunity that we have being paired with a large wealth of education that a lot of other states don't have. We have so many resources that we're really lucky on the position we're in. And because we are part of a university, our motto is regulating through education. So we like to educate people as much as we can, encouraging them to do the right things, to follow the laws, to do the best to support and protect agriculture. So we always start off with trying to have a conversation with people. And I say 99% of people want to do the right thing and they want our help. There are very few people that are excited to be spreading invasive species. They just don't know, what they're doing, and they don't know the pest is there, or they don't know it's a problem. So if you can educate people on some of these things, they usually make the right choice. So I talked a little bit about our mission, but officially we serve to protect South Carolina's agricultural and natural resources from the introduction and spread of plant pests, honeybee pests, and invasive species. So we do not regulate everything, all organisms. We don't deal with the vertebrates. We deal with plants, insects, a couple of viruses and bacteria, and just a couple of mollusks. So specifically invasive plants and things that hurt plants. Okay, back to invasive species. So we all know this is a big problem. And this diagram is very helpful in kind of explaining how we handle different species and when we want to step in. So when a new species comes to an area, is introduced, over time, it becomes as more areas covered, it becomes more costly and more difficult to completely eradicate. And eradication is not always our goal. It'd be ideal if we could eradicate every new invasive species, but if we can detect it in that green range, at that point, eradication is much simpler. If we can find the infestation when it's small, the population is in limited pockets, it's not, covering hundreds and hundreds of acres, for example, or very hard to detect. If we can hit it at that point, that's ideal. And we take a lot of different steps, which I'll try not to get ahead of myself and talk about, to try to hit the invasion curve at that point. Once the area becomes more and more infested and public start to notice. So, they're noticing kudzu covering their houses, or they're seeing it in ditches everywhere, or, they're seeing it cover up their favorite parks and things like that. Total eradication is really unlikely unless there's an extremely intense effort. And sometimes we can get that curve to go back down and we can keep it limited and keep it from spreading. But once that curve hits and it's covering large areas, really the only way to control it is local management, and then encouraging good practices like keeping people from selling it or trading it and things like that. So depending on what point on this invasion curve, our techniques change. And we have to change and adapt as we see different infestations progress. Some we're able to nip in the bud. That's great. Unfortunately, a lot of others, we have to change our tactics as new technology and things come along. Sorry. Okay. So I mentioned early detection being very important. Also rapid response. So we want to respond as quickly as possible in order to, stop. Sorry, it's not on a timer on that slide. So I get it to go back. Okay. And then after we respond quickly, we want to continue to monitor. So that's Steve standing up there with a Kogan grass patch. We continue to monitor, for example, our Kogan grass patches for up to 10 years. We don't just spray and leave it and hope it's all gone. We go back year after year, we monitor the patch, we see how, if it's shrinking, if it's staying the same, we make mistakes, we miss spots. Sometimes it may appear that it's gone, and then a little soil disturbance, it reemerges a few years later. So long-term monitoring is really important. This is some other work that we do, a couple of other things. We do surveys and inspections. So we have inspectors across the state that every year do surveys inside nurseries, greenhouses, out in the wild, on roadsides, in the woods. We go to ports, we inspect incoming imports, exports, gosh, all different places we do inspections. We are a small team though, there's really only a handful of us. So one of our most important strategies is actually engaging in the public. Once again, I'm going to try not to get ahead of ourselves with where I'm going to talk about the public in a little bit. We do different things like create quarantines. Everybody knows what a quarantine is now, thanks to COVID. One good thing I always say that came out of COVID is most people know what the word quarantine means now. So that's one thing that we do to try to limit movement of certain regulated materials. There's so many different techniques, and some things we treat and some things we just try to prevent from spreading. Click to the next slide. Sorry about the delays with changing slides. Okay. So like I mentioned, we're a small team. There's probably got like 5 nursery inspectors. We only have 3 full-time invasive species people right now. So really not a whole lot of us that are able to get our eyes. We do as much as we can, but investing in public outreach. So events like this, we go to trade shows, we talk at schools, we do online talks, we do billboards, TV, radio, Facebook. We've got a lot of different social media. We do as much as we can to reach as many people as possible, because a lot of the invasive species that we find are reported by members of the public. Sorry, I don't know if it's gonna disrupt on the Zoom if you guys are hearing this siren. Okay, it's gone. So one of the ways that we involve the public is through our reporting tools. So that URL you're seeing at the bottom there, that's our short URL, clemson.edu/invasives. That'll take you to all of our educational resources. It'll also take you to our 3 reporting tools. Let me see if I think if I click this, there we go. I don't know if y'all will be able to see online, it might be too small, but we have 3 reporting tools right now. We're updating and adding new ones all the time. We've got Asian longhorn beetle at the moment, Kogan grass, and spotted lanternfly. So these tools can be pulled up on your phone or on a computer, and they guide you. If you want to make a report, you think you've seen an invasive species, they show you photo comparisons. They ask you, did you see a beetle? Did you see damage from a beetle? What kind of tree species was it? And then it shows you what kind of host species it is. It lets you put in your phone number if you want to, your email if you want to be contacted, if you don't want to be contacted. And then very importantly, you can add photos to it, so you can show us what it is. Because the first thing we're going to ask if you call us is, can you send us a photo? Or do you have a specimen? And then drop a GPS point so we know where to get it. Because having this tool allows us to respond rapidly. Playing phone tag back and forth, we can get the information we need, but this is great because we have everything we need in one place. We can send it to an inspector. They can drive out and check it out. And we can find out right away if it's, going to be a big problem. Most of the stuff we can identify just from a photo, and we'll reach out to folks and let them know if it isn't the invasive species, what it is. And, we still encourage people to report, but that's one of the ways that we have found, the majority of our Kogan grass infestations. And then also our Asian longhorn beetle infestation, which is a big multi-million-dollar problem that we have in the Charleston area, was reported by a homeowner. So it had been in the area for 10 to 15 years, but a homeowner was like, I don't recognize this. They submitted a sample and they got us a picture, and they, that's how we actually ended up finding this species, which we had been surveying for years, which was a little hurtful, but we just, when it's on private property, we can't be trapping on a lot of private property. So we do depend on the public for that. So I do encourage you to check out our website and utilize this tool. If you have any questions about the tool, I'd be happy to demo it to you after the presentation as well. Okay. And I already talked about how great the app is. Yeah, I told you I'd get ahead of myself. This is a little video I'll show you real quickly of treating of a new Kogon grass patch that was in Beaufort that was reported by a citizen, I think 2 summers ago. It was along a walkway. This person was a very avid plant guru, wants to identify all the plants he sees. Couldn't identify this plant. Wasn't showing up in his native plant guide. Couldn't figure out what this grass was. And really out of frustration for wanting to know what it was, figured it out and reported it to us, which was really cool. So a couple of our techniques we use with wrapper response, we'll issue things called stop sales. So if we suspect that someone is selling a regulated species, we'll put a stop sale on that particular item. We have to confirm identification with one of our, what's the word? Plant, why am I blanking?
Identifier?
Yeah, plant identifier. There's a special word for a person that identifies plants.
Taxonomist.
Taxonomist, thank you. Taxonomist. Oh, it was gonna bother me if I didn't get the name. And then we'll do trace back. So if something comes into a nursery from another nursery, a disease, a plant, an insect, we'll trace back and try to find the original source, make sure they know, that way they can alert other states that might have been receiving this material. And then we may need to destroy the plants or do treatments. We'll even do trace forwards. If people have already purchased something or received something, we'll try to get with them, contact them, let them know they're in possession of something regulated. They probably have no idea and make sure that it doesn't continue to spread and, throughout the landscape.
I might interject here. It's just one of the things that makes it difficult, especially on tracebacks, is that some of these things you cannot see. So the organism may have to be identified in a DNA lab. Mm-hmm. And for instance, some of the phytophthora, there's thousands and thousands of phytophthora out there, but you might have heard of sudden oak death, which is wiping out a lot of trees out in California. But and then nursery stock moving from California comes here, and if the inspector suspects that he sees symptoms, which sometimes these symptoms look like it, maybe it is, maybe it's not, because he's not able to identify it in the field. He'll take a sample, it goes to that DNA lab, and then they can positively determine which it is. And then that way, it goes back to where it came from. That's the trace back.
Yeah. So that's a good example. And that plant pest diagnostics clinic I was talking about earlier, they take public and commercial samples. They also take samples from us. So we are housed in the same building. Well, I am. Some of our inspectors across the state are not. So we're able to get confirmation they have DNA technology they can do. They can plate out if we have some sort of fungal pathogen, they can plate it out, identify it, as well as having somebody, for example, a taxonomist. No, I'm not going to forget that word. They can confirm a plant identification for us as well. It's a little easier if it's something like a plant, we're pretty sure we know what it is. It's still, we always want verification, especially if we're going to be interfering with someone's business. We want to make sure we're correct. We do not want to be, our goal is to, make sure that commerce and industry flows smoothly. So we're not trying to create any problems if they do not exist. So we always make sure we double check, and we're really lucky to have the lab's resources to be able to do that and get our answers really quickly. Anything else you want to add, Steve? On this side?
That's good.
Okay.
What do you have here on the screen? An area delineated
Oh yeah, so the quarantine zone, that's right. I was talking about how that is, so quarantine zones are something that we sometimes use to prevent further spread of invasive species. So this is an example of our Asian longhorn beetle quarantine zone. And so we were able to put an emergency quarantine in place, but in order to get an actual quarantine zone established long-term, it is a regulatory process. So it did have to go before the state government, it had to go before the Senate, House, and be signed off on in order to, and that kept our entire state from being regulated. So the regulations are any of the Asian longhorn beetles host trees. There's about 11 genera of trees, any of that material. And if it is already cut material, so firewood or branches, anything larger than 1/2 inch in 2 dimensions, which is almost all wood, right? That's pretty small chips, cannot be moved out of that quarantine zone. So instead of having that be the entire state, which would have been really bad, we just were able to isolate it to that zone. And we were really lucky. There happens to be a waste facility in the center of the quarantine zone that homeowners can bring their woody debris to, and they had been bringing it to for a long time. So we're pretty happy that we weren't having material spread out before we were aware of this infestation when there is a place. We do have concerns. There's things like hurricanes and large storms in Charleston area, as y'all know about. That creates a lot of woody debris. So storm wood management is a major concern. We try to do as much as we can to keep that from getting spread outside the quarantine zone. But, you know, at that point, people are in survival mode. They're not thinking about spreading something. They're just trying to protect their homes. So that is one challenge that we run into in that area.
That quarantine zone there is about 76 square miles.
That's correct.
And I may be jumping ahead, but at this point right now, they've already taken and ground to sawdust over 7,000 trees.
Yes.
So this is not a simple problem. And to do surveys, some of these areas, they may not be giant numbers of the Asian longhorn beetles. So you have to go and survey it, and then you go back and survey that area again. If you find something that looks suspect, but it's 40 feet in the top of a tree, then you got to have a tree climber to come in to go up and make sure that what it is. And yes, they stuck me in the swamps there with the alligators, and the
retirement started looking real good.
Yeah, I was thinking, and it was 105 degrees. So.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for our field crews. Steve and I have both been in the field for the Asian longhorn beetle program. We have a lot of respect for those folks on the ground crews, as well as our tree climbing crews. That is a joint USDA and Clemson project, a cooperative eradication program. So we work side by side with the USDA on that one, which is wonderful. And it is well funded, which allows us to be able to do it. Yeah.
She does she has to test for a certain kind of beetle that can kill pine trees. So I guess that's also a partnership. She fights forest fires, but on the side she does that too. She'll check her beetle traps. I went out with her last week to do that.
Yeah, we're definitely not the only ones that trap. The USDA traps, the Forest Service traps as well. We try not to overlap and do the exact same pests at the same time. The Forest Service tends to be more focused on forestry product trees, so pine trees. It makes sense that that they're looking for those. Sometimes those are not invasive pests, but are still pests. Like we said, not every pest is invasive. There are native pests as well. So yeah, that's cool. I'm glad that they're trapping for those beetles as well. We are very lucky to be able to refer folks. A lot of people, there's a lot of native longhorn beetles that are lookalikes that are host on pine trees, and that's not something that we work with. So we often refer them to the Forestry Commission. Yeah. All right. So treatments. We also do treatments. That's another technique that we use. So this is a couple of pictures. I know you might recognize certain plants on there. Let me see. I'm just going to try to talk about each photo as it comes up. So in the top left corner, That is Steve and I in the background with the masks on in the Tyvek suits. That was a very large Kogan grass treatment operation that was multi-acre, multi-property. We had to use ATVs to treat with herbicides. There's Steve in the bottom. He's doing roadside treatment of Kogan grass there with just a hand pump. So that's coming back doing some of those touch-ups or for smaller infestations. That middle photo shows another reason we don't just treat once. You see that little green patch in the middle of the brown? We missed that patch. So that's why you don't treat once and assume it's all gone, because you make mistakes, especially when you're trying to spray a really large area. Sometimes it's covering other plants and the wind blows it, and then there's parts that you missed. We do stump treatments for when we remove those trees for the Asian longhorn beetle program. That's the photo on the bottom right. I think that was a large elm that was removed, and they treat to make sure that that tree doesn't come back, so that ALB can't host in it again. And sometimes it's as simple as a little squirt bottle and a glove. So that can help if you're trying to be very precise, especially like I said, for those follow-up second, third, fourth year applications. It can be helpful to use small tools. Yes?
What do you put in squirt bottle?
That would be a mixture of herbicides, depending on what kind of species we're treating. Yeah.
Is there collateral damage when you're treating invasive species, native species that get, pesticides and stuff?
That's a good question. That is depends on the species we're treating and the chemicals we're using. I'm sure there are some. I would say with Kogan grass, it tends to be a monoculture. There is usually nothing else that can grow, as is the nature of Kogan grass. Maybe around the edges, we do a perimeter to make sure we haven't missed any. So maybe the 1 foot perimeter around the patch. Luckily, because it grows as a monoculture, we don't have to, put as many native species at risk, which is nice. But I'm sure it is always a risk. You have to be careful with certain chemicals that are soil active that remain in the soil and can be taken up by roots of trees nearby. So we try to be conscious of that and use different chemicals depending on where we're treating. Yeah. Also the conditions, if you've ever used herbicides or chemicals, can't be a super windy day, has to be right conditions. You don't want it to rain immediately afterwards. We do look at those things before we treat. Yeah. In terms of the Asian longhorn beetle program, because it is a physical mechanical removal of the tree, I can say pretty safely we don't have a lot of collateral damage. We're just selecting out invasive trees. We have a contractor that does that. Occasionally they may have to trim a sweet gum out of the way to access a tree. But I wouldn't say in that case, it probably have very much damage of native species. Yeah.
That might, excuse me, that might be more of a concern, like with fig buttercup, because it grows where a lot of our desirable spring ephemerals grow. And
Most of what we see is like that monoculture.
Right.
Once you have been treating a fig buttercup patch for a number of years, it will start to become a sparser, more difficult to find, but also, so you have to do spot treatments. We use something for that. We use a foaming application, for example. So it creates a foam that sits, there's no drift, there's no spray involved. So it's like spraying shaving cream essentially. And then as long as it's not a super windy day, it just slowly pops and it's very minimal. As long as you're precise, very minimal damage to plants nearby. That's a great tool for precise herbicide application, especially in sensitive areas. Okay, and I've already talked about long-term monitoring, but I did miss an important part in long-term monitoring, mapping. So we keep track of where these infestations are all across the state, where they were historically, where we're treating. We measure the acreage, how it's decreased, how many acres we treated, what we treated with. If we got a report and we went and checked it out and it wasn't actually an invasive species, we still drop a pin and mark that. So we know we've investigated it. So we try to keep track of all this data, makes it a lot easier for long-term monitoring, and also make sure we keep getting funding. We show them that we're doing this, we're following up on these, we're treating every year. We can see how many years have been since we treated this site. Oh, wow, something popped back up after 3 years with nobody seeing anything and no treatment. We do at least annual site visits and retreatment. We also have compliance programs. So if someone has a plant or an insect that is a regulated pest, we do have the authority to treat it or remove it, but we like to have folks on board and be in compliance. So we talked with them first. We explained to them what we want to do, what we're going to be doing. And then we sign it. They usually will sign a compliance agreement with us saying they understand what we're doing, exactly what we're treating, what our treatment plan is. They have our contact information. They understand the regulations that go along with it. So we're not just these crazy people coming in. And so that is a very important part of our program, making sure that they understand and they're in agreements, and they're going to, be in compliance with us and let us know what's going on and keep updating us. So sometimes we do have to adjust our approach. So transitioning from stopping something to slowing. So certain pests that, have been attempted to be eradicated. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what you used to do with fire ants and your fly work. You want to talk about that for a second?
That might be interesting too. I mean, we're entering a new world right now, where, there's genetically modified organisms are being used, sterile insects are released so that it confuses their breeding. Hormones are dropped out of airplanes to confuse the insects that are trying to breed, so that it confuses the system of them having offspring. But one of the projects that I worked on the side, beside the Kogan grass, was the imported fire ant. And a lot of my work was to go out and educate people in the nurseries, because they were the main ones that were moving the fire ants. And if they had a shipment that wasn't chemically treated, it had to be inside of a structure where fire ants couldn't get to it, or it had to be inspected and chemically treated before it could be moved out of the quarantine zone. And most of the Southeast is quarantined. And now the fire ants are still moving. I mean, they're moving north still. And but one of the projects we worked on, there was the mass rearing lab in Florida that where they screened for years phorid flies. And these phorid flies would inject an egg into the fire ant and basically eat the inside out. And then it would go into the ant's head and pupate. So the ant's head would technically become like an egg casing for the phorid fly. And we actually have established multiple species of phorid flies, but unfortunately, it's not enough of them. In their homeland in South America, fire ants really aren't that bad of a problem, because there's so many native phorid flies and other things that attack the fire ants, fungi and other things. So, but we were able to, we would collect ants, send them to the mass rearing lab, bring them back, and put them into the mound that they came out of. So we had to keep precise locations of each mound where those came from. And we'd reintroduce these infected fire ants into the mound. So that was part of the technology. Now with some of the things that we're going to be seeing in the future, and they're already working on a lot of these now, is CRISPR technology, where they'll actually modify the genetics of them to make them weak or stronger, their predators stronger. And fungi actually are being used in some of the fire ant programs now to try research to try to find a way to stop the fire ants. So that was an interesting time, because we literally went to every county and released flies. And then we went back and trapped for these flies. And these are flies that are so small, you can't see them unless you look at them under a microscope. So it was quite tedious also, beside it was kind of fun riding around and releasing them, but except for the part where the ants bite you when you mess with them anyway, and there's no getting away from them.
The danger that the flies that you were injecting, they would free to go outside of the ant population and create a problem.
Yes, and that was always a concern, and but that is part of the screening process. So we only have one native fire ant in the United States that's in that same genus. There are other ants that will sting and bite, but they are not as common as the fire ant is in the Southeast. But the screening process took years, and a lot of the flies that they brought, they collected them mainly in Argentina and South America. They didn't cut the mustard. They were causing other ants to die. So they were tested on multiple species for years before that one was allowed to be released. So there's precautions, but, you know, and my wife was not happy because some of these, in the very beginning, I actually reared these flies in my house because it was too cold at work. And she was quite concerned because we got drain flies one time, and she was sure that I caused it from breeding the flies at the house.
So yeah, that's an example of a biocontrol technique. Obviously, we're not going to eliminate fire ants, unfortunately, but there's still things we can do. We can slow the spread. So that's one transition of a program, and a biocontrol that was semi-successful. It's just those forward flies have a really hard time making it from colony to colony. After they've decimated one colony, fire ants, if the next mound isn't within a certain distance, they're just so small that they have a hard time spreading naturally very far on their own. Imagine, I mean, you know how small fire ants are, so imagine something that goes inside of a fire ant is very, very small. Okay, well, that is the majority of my presentation. I have 3 examples that I wanted to see which one y'all would like to talk about. I've talked a little bit about Kogon grass so far. That's one major species of concern that is about to be blooming very soon. I can talk a bit more about our Asian longhorn beetle program, or we can talk about one that's not here yet, knock on wood, but we are still looking for because it is established in North Carolina, and that's spotted lanternfly. So what do y'all want to hear about? Do we have time? Yeah? Okay.
You have to holler and let us know when we've talked too long.
Well, you keep it interesting. We're here.
Okay.
I heard one for spotted lanternfly. Everyone wants to hear about spotted lanternfly. Okay, sorry, Bill. You're gonna have to hear about spotted lanternfly again. All right. Don't get motion sick. I'm gonna have to click through a bunch of slides because I wasn't sure which one you're gonna pick. So I have them all here. I think spotted lanternfly is at the end.
How many of you heard of the spotted lanternfly?
Don't get motion sick. I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, I went too far. All right. Spotted lanternfly it is. So its name is misleading. It's not a fly. It is actually a large leaf hopper, and it's native to Southeast Asia, including parts of Bangladesh, Vietnam, and China. Now, y'all know we have a lot of invasive species that happen to be from Asian countries. Does anyone know why that is? Yeah, so I heard both shipping and then similar conditions. That's correct. So we have an economy that brings in a lot of products from these Asian countries. That's the way that our economy works right now. And as long as the demand is there, the supply will be there. Different countries have different regulations, and, you know, it happens. These things happen by mistake. Once you understand a little bit more about spotted lanternfly, you'll understand how easy it is to spread and why it's been spreading so much. But if our conditions in the environment were not similar to those in the native range, they would not be able to survive. So it seems like it's so different, it's so far away, but there's a lot of similar characteristics that allow these species to survive that they wouldn't survive in certain areas, like, you know, in the Southwest, for example, wouldn't be able to do as well. So I just want to talk about that because we do have so many invasive species from some of these Asian countries. So it was first detected in 2014 in Pennsylvania, and it spread to west, north, and south since then. And most recently it was established, officially they have an established population in North Carolina, and that was last summer. So it's very nearby. It's along highways and corridors. It's in multiple counties now. I personally think it's probably already in South Carolina. We just don't know where it is yet. We've had several reports through our reporting tool, and none so far have turned out to be something that we've been able to find an actual population, or anyone's been able to produce a sample. Most of them have been butterflies. Very understandably, if you see one with its wings pinned open, it does look like a lot of native butterfly species. So it has multiple life cycles, which makes it very difficult to detect, especially in its egg stage, which just looks like a little smear of mud pretty much. It begins its life cycle when its eggs are laid, and they can be laid on any surface left outdoors. So often that's other plants, bark of trees, but it could be on an RV, tractor trailer, a train car, could be on a bicycle, could be on a lawn chair left outside, really anything. They'll lay their eggs on a fence post. Yeah, any sort of potted plant, you know, flower pots. It's really difficult. It's just a small little smear of mud, maybe the size of the tip of your thumb, or at the large one, maybe the size of your whole thumb. Then it matures through 4 different instars, which a lot of these instars look like a lot of true bug instars. And then it finally molts into an adult around July each year, which can be mistaken for many other insect species. Its primary host plant is an invasive species as well. So tree of heaven, or Ailanthus altissima, that is its by far preferred host species. So when it was first detected, people were like, great, let it kill the tree of heaven. Wonderful. We found a biocontrol. But unfortunately, it feeds on 100 other plants, species, native species, ornamental species, hardwoods, fruit trees. So that is obviously a big issue when it has such a wide palette. When I went to Pennsylvania last summer to ground zero, where it's like a plague of the locust and you're getting hit in the face by a spotted lanternfly and you can't take a step without stepping on one. Other than Ailanthus, I'd say the second tree I saw, or plant I saw on the most, was wild grape. Saw a little bit on maple and walnut, but it has been seen to feed on many, many other species. It has wiped out some vineyards and orchards, which are our main concern right now. So the feeding and how it damages the plant is a little complicated, but it is a sapsucker, or a sap siphoner, I should say. It's also a big nuisance pest. I mentioned, I don't know if y'all have seen, there's been a lot of articles. It's been on Saturday Night Live. It's been on Jimmy Fallon's show recently. It's a nuisance because, you know, there's such high numbers, but also it excretes honeydew, which is a sticky waste substance. So it's feeding on saps and it's excreting a sugary substance, which comes down like rain when it's in large numbers. And then it causes sooty mold on plant leaves. And that's actually what causes the damage on the plant. It's not the sap reduction itself. That can cause a little bit of leaf dieback, but it's actually blocking photosynthesis by the secondary sooty mold coming in. So it's a multi-step problem. I already mentioned some of our species of concern. We're worried about a lot of these fruit and nut trees and some of our native hardwoods. It does not suck sap out. It is a passive feeder. So it's like tapping a tree for maple syrup. Just pokes a little hole and it lets the natural pressure of the tree's sap flow. So it's not going to be feeding on a tree when the sap is not flowing. And it also means it can't bite humans or animals. So don't have to worry about that at least. This is a pretty intense infestation, so you can see how crazy the numbers can get. If you want to be grossed out, I totally advise you to look up videos of SLF infestations. So it can take away vital sugars, but like I said, it has to be in numbers like this. It's really that sooty mold growing on the leaves. This is just kind of an example of how many egg masses there can be and how hard it can be to see them. So it can be easy if they're freshly laid or the bark is really dark. But as you can see, if it's a similar color to the egg case, the bark, it can be really difficult to detect. And all it takes is one egg case to start a whole new infestation. There can be up to like 60 individuals that can hatch out of there. And each female can lay numerous eggs. In terms of preventing the spread, like I said, they can lay their eggs on like any surface. So I know in Pennsylvania, what they're trying to prioritize right now is doing inspection and treatments around major transportation. So train yards, they're heavily spraying insecticides around train yards. Unfortunately, there is no selective insecticide for spotted lanternfly. So there is a high risk of killing other species of insects. They have to be very careful. They can't treat when there's going to be a lot of bees out. They will put systemic pesticides on ailanthus trees so that SLF feeding on ailanthus will die, but they can't do that when the tree is blooming because they don't want bees feeding on that nectar. So it can be really tricky to control. So that's really what their money is going into right now, trying not to make their problem everyone else's problem. How you can help is by inspecting your vehicle and equipment belongings if you're ever moving through an area where spotted lanternfly is known to be, which now is quite a few states, unfortunately. Like I said, it can be very difficult, but just checking your vehicle or if you are moving anything from different states. Right now, we have a pretty exciting project that we're working on. We are using zip code information to find anyone that visits our state parks from areas with spotted lanternfly infestations. We can see what zip code they came from, if there's an infestation there, how long they stayed in one of our state parks. And so it can give us an idea of how high of a risk of introducing this species to that area. We don't need any names or any of that information. We just need to know where the vehicle, the RV came from, how long it was there. And so it can be helpful for targeting, trapping, or detection or outreach. And that's all I have for you on spotted lanternfly. I want to keep it pretty short.
Those seeds, bugs everywhere. Is that July when they're getting ready to lay eggs?
That's the adult.
Yes. So he was asking this photo. Yes, that's all the adult larvae. Excuse me, adult larvae. That's the adult stage. This photo here, that is, I think, the 4th instar. So they start to turn red in the later instars. Yeah, so that is earlier in the season. You'll see a mixture of different life stages at the same time, depending on when you're there. So you'll see a couple of the first instars during certain seasons. As it shifts, you'll see adults and the later instars at the same time. Yeah.
But this is a good example of how you can help.
Yes.
Because with five people or however many surveyors that we have out there, you can help, because if you're out in the woods and you see ailanthus, it's pretty easy to identify a tree. There's some sumacs and things that look like it, but
it also feeds on sumac, so that's okay if you look at sumac.
It's okay that you see it, but that would be the one that it goes to. And if you see the egg masses, it looks kind of like wads of chewing gum, strings of them on the tree. So, you know, if you're out and rambling or hiking and you see ailanthus, go and take a look at it. Look at it up close and see. It's the same way if you were in the Charleston area and the primary host is maple for the Asian longhorn beetle, you look at that tree and see. As a matter of fact, the first day that we went to the place, what we call ground zero, where the Asian longhorn beetle came from, and what happened, really what the story was there is a homeowner wanted to cut a tree down in her yard that had died. And the homeowners association wouldn't let her do it unless she replaced it with a $4,000 tree. So she kept the insect that she found for like 2 weeks on her counter, and then sent a photo to Extension. Extension sent the photo to me, and I won't tell you how I felt, but I thought, oh no, my stomach doesn't feel right. But from there, I called the inspector that was close to that location, and I said, drop what you're doing, go get that insect right now. And it came back, went to the state entomologist, then it went to the Smithsonian. DNA confirmed that it was the Asian longhorn beetle. So you being people out that are out there walking around and looking, you can help find these things. This was an accident that we found it when we did. I mean, if that had spread all over Charleston, it would probably end up here real quick. We got a question.
Yeah.
Is there a website or somewhere that we should report finding?
Yes. Yes. Let me get to my slides. Sorry, I had a lot of slides. Hold on.
What kind of maple do they target?
All of them.
Yeah. So in South Carolina, 98% of the infested trees are maples, and 97% of those are red maples. There's a few elms, a couple of willows, but they highly prefer red maples, which is our most common maple species. Huh?
What people love, landscapers love.
Yes,
Exactly.
they will host on Japanese maples as well. Any piece of wood that is larger than 1/2 inch in 2 dimensions, they can technically infest. They don't usually go for things that small, but if the egg is laid and the tree's growing and they can complete the life cycle, it has been shown to be possible. So they can be on Japanese maple. We do inspect Japanese maple trees. I don't think we've ever found.
Yeah, we found Japanese maple
with infestation on it. Okay, well, there's at least one.
I mean, I know of one because I found it. Now, this was a seedling. It wasn't a grafted tree.
This website right here, that's where you can find all of our regulated invasive species, the entire state plant pest list. You can find our reporting tools, and then you can find educational information on these pests if you want to read more. If you are here in person, I also have brochures. I have specimens of spotted lanternfly. I have specimens of Asian longhorn beetle and damaged wood to show you what to look for as well.
Yeah, that was quite a lot. The longhorn, have any of the jewelry that they make out of those?
I don't. Yeah, so if you go to Pennsylvania, people are making the best of the worst, and they are doing what they can and making crafting earrings out of spotted lanternfly wings. They are marketing spotted lanternfly honey because I mentioned the honeydew that the spotted lanternfly excrete. Bees love that, and they will collect the spotted lanternfly excrement and make honey out of it. So they're really going full circle, crafty as they can be, and trying to make a market out of a really bad situation.
And you can get great spotted lanternfly t-shirts, hats.
Oh, all kinds of
It's
stuff.
all that on it.
I've got some twos back there, but I don't have hats. Sorry.
Well, I mean, you can go and buy these on the internet. They're marketing.
Any other questions? Yeah.
My concern is about the Japanese knotweed. You know, I think I spotted it once down the river the other day, and I was really concerned. I wouldn't know anything about it, but I've lived in the Netherlands the past 4 years, and it's a big problem there.
I didn't know that.
You know, it can grow so tall, and I was just like, I saw it, and I was like, I was shocked to see it here. I was like, oh no, this is terrible. So, what do you know about that, and what have you done about it? How do you treat it?
Good question. I'm just going to repeat it so everyone online can hear. She asked about Japanese knotweed. I'm from Pennsylvania. It's a big problem in Pennsylvania. I've just started noticing it. It's in much smaller patches here. Not that that's good, but I will tell you it's not as bad as it is in Pennsylvania. It's not a regulated species. It's not currently on our list. So it's not something that we have the authority to treat ourselves. It doesn't mean there's not things that you can do about it. When it comes to treating any non-regulated species, I always advise people to go to Clemson's Home and Garden Information Center, or HGIC. They have a hotline, and they also have wonderful web articles that you can read about treatments of non-regulated species.
I think when people start thinking about it, they use for the foundation of the house.
Yeah.
They might get concerned about it regulated.
Yeah.
I've read that some people have committed suicide over finding it in their yard in England. And I've seen places in the higher elevations of North Carolina where it was literally eating the asphalt.
Yeah.
And of course, Cogan grass can do the same thing. It'll grow through asphalt, railroad ties, things that you wouldn't think that a plant would be able to go through.
Yeah. If y'all are curious about how things get on this list, I'm happy to talk about how they do become regulated on the list. So how it works is I talked about that State Plant Pest Commission. So that is 3 Board of Trustee members. They're the ones that have the authority. And so every year a group gets together that has representatives from like Forestry Commission. We've got Clemson representatives. We have industry representatives, and they propose species to be added or taken off. So the 2 newest ones are Bradford pear or Callery pear, and then Iliagnus. So those 2 were added to the state plant pest list a couple of years ago, but there's a grandfather period, so they did not become active until 2024. That is when they'll be officially banned, and that does not mean we're going to come cut them all down and remove them all. It means it's banned from sale or trade, so no one is allowed to sell them anymore, or you can't dig it up and give it to somebody. So that was one that was added. It still does have to go through the legislative process as well. So it has to be approved by the House and the Senate in order to be officially added. So there's a whole legislative process, and we don't usually add more than 1 or 2 at a time. And we don't usually, take off a whole lot until it's something like, for example, kudzu. I'm not saying kudzu's been on there, but that's one where, this no hope for that. No, kudzu is not.
And if they eliminated kudzu now, then probably most of our mountains would wash away.
It is
bad?
Excellent erosion control. That is true. I think I saw another hand. Yeah.
Where in Pennsylvania you said you found it?
For spotted lanternfly, it's in eastern Pennsylvania, in the Lancaster area. I don't know, east central, I should say, Pennsylvania. Y'all familiar with? Anyone been to Pennsylvania? Okay, I'm from Western Pennsylvania. So my parents' county just got it last year.
7 years.
Any other questions? Are there any questions on? Let me read the chat. I'm sorry, there might be a question online. Okay.
Where can you report starting with the base?
Oh yes, that Clemson.edu/invasives. Yep. And you can do so anonymously, or it also makes it so you can submit it on if you see it on a public property or something like that. It doesn't have to be on your property. Obviously we're not going to be, if it's not on someone's property that they're reporting on, we're going to of course contact the homeowner if it is something of concern. We're not just going to walk onto their property, but anything you see driving down a roadside, drop a pin. You can do it from home later, but it's probably best if you do it when you're there, because if you're on your phone, you can get the exact GPS coordinates.
Steve was a big help with us on Big Buttercup. He got his guys out there and surveyed it and set up a system where we could contact. We knew who the landowners were, wherever we got funded. Steve helped us to get a letter out to those folks, and we got very good participation.
Yeah.
Most people